So hi everyone, I tend to be really bad with these presentations. So recently someone advised me to join Toastmasters, and when I went there, the first thing I was told is you should always start a presentation with an icebreaker. So let's get that out of the way first. So I'm pretty sure compliance is probably the most exciting part of an Amazon business, right? Probably not. I'm sure most of you don't get up in the morning looking forward to making those QC checklists. So I wasn't actually planning to talk about compliance today. I just came here to share my story with you. But then I looked on the Facebook group that Global Sources runs for this event, and Meghla asked a question: what do you find most challenging when importing from China? And regulatory compliance was right at the top. In fact, it was between compliance and IP, but then I voted for compliance and got it to number one. So compliance is not the most sexy subject, but it's something that most people care about because it impacts your business in a lot of ways. So I'll try and not talk about compliance too much, but I'll touch upon compliance throughout the story and hopefully share some lessons with you that can help you. Through this experience, I think you'll find that compliance, not being compliant, can probably put you out of business, can lead to lawsuits, and in my case, it can lead to a lot of stress-induced hair loss as well, as you can see. So let's get started. I'll just give you a quick intro. My name is Ash Monga. I started dealing with China about 12 years ago when I first started importing products into the UK. I was running an e-commerce business. It wasn't Amazon-based. Amazon was still pretty small at that time, but we were doing a wholesale e-commerce thing. I did that for about 6 years, and I thought I might as well go to the other side of the world, came to China, and started IMEX sourcing services. That's what I've been doing for the last 6 years now. We work with a lot of Amazon sellers. Because of my e-commerce background, we naturally tended to connect more with the e-commerce sellers. And compliance is a big part of our work. So I was hoping that, and compliance is such a minefield that over the years, despite doing this for nearly 12 years now, we still learn new things all the time, as you learned from this story today. And hopefully I can share some of those lessons with you so you don't have to make those mistakes. So if compliance is so important, why is it that all these Amazon courses out there so silent on compliance? Well, in my opinion, there are 3 reasons for that. Number one, like I mentioned before, it's boring as hell. Even though I deal with compliance all the time, I know that most people don't like talking about it. There are times when we are having compliance issue with the factory, and I really want to go back home and discuss that with my girlfriend. But from experience, I've learned that's not a good idea. Second, it's very technical. So a lot of these courses are very marketing and sales focused, because marketing case studies tend to be more fun. People tend to enjoy reading them, but compliance literature tends to be very technical. There's a lot of rules and regulations, especially for products with a lot of components. So people tend to not connect with compliance literature as easily as they do with, say, sales and marketing. And last but not the least, compliance is expensive. So a lot of these Amazon courses are based on the premise that you can start an Amazon business with $1,000. And you can do that, but it's very hard to be fully compliant when you're doing that. So as you learned from this case, for a product like this, if you want a fully compliant product, you could end up spending upwards of $50,000. So it kind of breaks the business model for a lot of these courses. If you talk about compliance costs, which is why compliance is not a subject you see discussed in a lot of these Amazon courses. A lot of Amazon sellers tend to believe that compliance is just for the big boys. But that is not the case, especially when a product is under the scanner. So normally what I find personally, what I feel is 70% of the products on Amazon today are non-compliant. But most of them go under the radar because they're not under the scanner. But if an incident happens, it kind of affects the whole industry, as you'll see from this case today. So back in September last year, Hoverboards became very popular. So we partnered up with a client of ours to start selling hoverboards on Amazon UK. Demand was completely off the charts. We were selling a lot of product. In fact, we were selling faster than factories could produce. while we had shipments on the sea, we were doing air shipments, and we were paying $70 per unit to air freight the goods. And despite that, we were making a pretty hefty margin. We were selling the product at 375 pounds, which is about 500 US dollars. We had, on a landed cost, we had a margin of about 135% on our sea shipments and about 85% on our air shipments. And we were doing an air shipment every 5 days. So despite air shipments being really expensive, we had pretty good margins on this product. So new factories were coming up overnight. So this is one of the things that tends to happen in China. When a product becomes popular, you'll see new factories come up in pretty much no time. I find it quite astonishing, actually, the speed at which factories transition from making one product to another. I've personally known factories that were making USB cables, and then a year later they were making loom bands, and then a year later they were making hoverboards. So that's a major supply chain risk, because factories tend to transition from one product to another pretty quickly in China, depending on the demand for a product. So we had a product that had a lot of moving parts, a lot of components, batteries, PCBs, motors, and anything with a lot of moving parts tends to have a higher risk of things going wrong. So we had pretty much zero negotiating power with the factory to get any changes made to the product, because the demand was so crazy. We literally had a person standing at the factory fighting with other customers to get stock. And this is not standard practice in China, but that's how crazy the demand was. We had to have someone standing in the factory to get stock for us. So factories were not willing to make any changes, but being on the ground, we were in a good position to find the right factory. We were working with one of the biggest factories. We had a fairly stable product, but not a perfect product. There wasn't actually a perfect product in the market at that time, because it was such a new product that factories hadn't evolved to a point where they could produce a really good product. And there was no time to make changes because of the Christmas window as well. So everyone believed that Christmas is the best time to sell this product, because this was, we thought of this as a gift product, and we thought if you have to maximize margins, it has to be before Christmas. So there wasn't really potential for making any major changes to the product. A lot of the factories were using fake batteries as well. So a lot of the factories were using fake Samsung and LG batteries. A lot of them were using low-end Chinese batteries. So when I say fake batteries, it's not only them just putting up a Samsung sticker on a battery. We actually found factories that were using battery cells that were made of cement. So that's how bad it can get with compliance. But fortunately, we were being on the ground, we were able to find a factory that was using genuine Samsung batteries. We bought from them, and we were safe on that front. But because it was a very young industry, the compliance standards were really not clear. So it was a good product, but not a perfect product. So we were making $200 margin per unit. We were very happy. The sales were great. Orders were coming in faster than factories could keep up, and we thought this is the product that's finally going to make us rich. And then the first bad news came in. Amazon decided to the UK government decided to ban hoverboards on public roads. So you can only use it in private property. You can't actually use hoverboards on public roads. UK was in fact the first country to do that. A lot of other countries followed. I think it was banned in Australia later, and a couple of states in the US as well. So we thought this is going to, sales are going to plummet, but in fact the exact opposite happened. Our sales went up, and I personally believe one of the main reasons for that is the main market for this product was teenagers. And we all know what happens when you tell teenagers not to do something. So sales increased, we were happy once again, and that's when the first explosion happened. And then the second, then the third, and then they were exploding left, right, and center. Luckily, not one of our hoverboards, but it was enough to get media attention, it was enough to get trading standards attention, and after that, pretty much all the shipments that were coming into the UK started getting stopped and checked by trading standards. So trading standards is the organization in the UK that's responsible for enforcing product quality standards. So, people had broken legs, injured wrists, someone's kitchen was blown up. That's what I like to call the 25,000-pound hoverboard. It was a 350-pound hoverboard and 24,650 pounds for the damaged kitchen. So trading standards decided they would, pretty much check every single shipment coming into the UK. We had a shipment that was just about to land at that time, and as expected, it was stopped by trading standards. But we were pretty confident that this shipment will go through because we had a pretty solid product. At least compared to the competition, we probably had the best product out there. So we were fairly positive about what would happen. We had a lot of emails exchanged back and forth with trading standards. We had to send in a lot of certificates. We had to send them a technical file, which is a requirement for any product that comes under the CE directive. So we sent all that, and we were pretty confident the product would be released. And then we were in the news. So trading standards decided to destroy the hoverboards that just landed in. So these are not just any hoverboards, these are our hoverboards. This is the last time they were seen before they left this planet. So we were, we were pretty disappointed. That's probably, it was the first time that something like this personally happened with me. $22,000 worth of goods just, went up in flames. And the reason they were destroyed was inside the plug, we were told that the fuse was non-compliant. So now this is a 5-cent component, the fuse that goes inside the plug. So because of 5-cent component, $22,000 worth of goods were just destroyed. And something like this is really hard to detect with factories in China. It's very hard to hold anyone accountable because 90% of the small to medium-sized factories in China don't have inbound QC on their components. And most of them don't actually understand how a lot of these components work. Most of them are assembly factories, so they will assemble all the components from different factories, put them together, and you have a product, which is also why they're able to transition from making one product to another in a very short amount of time. So our options were we could not send the goods back. We could not replace the plug or the fuse. We were told to sign the papers, send those in so that we could approve trading standards to destroy the goods. And if we didn't do that, the storage costs were kind of adding up every single day. So we didn't really have a choice. So we signed the papers in and the goods were destroyed. But it gets worse because we had 3 containers on the sea about to reach UK at that time, worth $300,000. So by this time, trading standards got really active. They were proactively raiding existing wholesalers who had stock, and they were taking over stock for all kinds of reasons: non-compliant plugs, non-compliant adapters, not having the right labels on the product. Any reason they could find, they were using that as an excuse to take goods and just destroy them. So now many of these points would be ignored in normal course of business, but because this product was under the scanner, they were all good reasons to just destroy the product. Media wanted action. So we were pretty worried. We thought if we lose $300,000 worth of stock, we would pretty much be out of business, both me and my partner. So this was pretty much the lowest point, in my entrepreneurial journey. And this is some of the news that came out at that time. 15,000 hoverboards seized by UK customs due to fire concerns. 20,000 pounds worth of hoverboards seized by trading standards officers in warehouse raid. Hoverboards impounded at UK ports over explosion risk. So when I said trading standards was destroying hoverboards, I meant literally. There are different ways. You could release stress after you have an argument with your wife or partner. This is probably one of the more enjoyable ones. So this was our lowest point. We thought this would put us out of business. Freight insurance didn't cover us. So it's very important to know that freight insurance does not cover you for these kind of risks, especially if the goods are intentionally damaged, which would have been the case here. So we were confident of the quality of these goods, but they had the same fuse. So then the day finally came in, the goods arrived in the UK, they were passed to trading standards as expected. And we were told that we sent in all the documentation, the same back and forth of emails, different officer this time. And we were told they would take a sample, send it to a lab, and it would take about 40 days for the results to come in, which meant we would have to pay storage costs for 40 days, and we wouldn't be on the tenterhooks about the results. So, more hair loss. So finally, there was some good news. Because of the workload trading standards had at the port, they decided that they would transfer all cases to local trading standards. in the area where the consignees were registered in order to spread the workload, which meant at least we don't have to pay the storage costs. So we were pretty happy with that news. We thought that we might be able to negotiate a bit better with the local trading standards, and also the fact that we didn't have to pay the storage costs. And then we were quite lucky. Trading standards understood our problems. They actually allowed us to replace the fuse, and we were good. We were back in business, and once again, we thought this is the product that would make us rich. So we were really excited about Christmas sales. Oh, before I go to that, there's a very important takeaway here, which is that not all trading standards officers are created equal. That's one of the lessons we learned from this experience. The same scenario happened with 2 different officers at 2 different ports. One of them allowed us to replace the plugs, the other one didn't. We also heard similar stories where some consignees were given the option to send their goods back outside of the EU, whereas we were not given that option. So, within the same department, different officers treat different cases differently, so there isn't, as of now, enough standardization. At least I can comment for trading standards in the UK. It might vary from country to country. But most of these compliance agencies tend to have a lot of these officers have power to make decisions themselves. So then there was more bad news. Right after we released the container, Amazon decides to stop selling hoverboards. So now we have $300,000 worth of stock, but we don't have a sales channel. So we decided, okay, at least, instead of paying 15% to Amazon, we could pay that to Google. So we set up 2 different e-commerce websites for my brand, my partner's brand, and we started selling again. And that's one of the advantages of having a high-value, high-margin product. In a lot of the consulting work I do, I always recommend clients, if they can afford to do that, look for these high-value, high-margin products. It gives you a lot of options in terms of your sales channels. So if you're looking to diversify outside of Amazon, these kind of products really help because you can, you can run PPC to your sites. You can offer affiliate commissions. There's a lot of ways to drive traffic. And the best thing was, despite all the negative press around this product, the sales were really good. So we were still selling very well. Demand didn't get affected at all, which was something even we were surprised by. So at this point, I decided to wholesale a large part of my stock, whereas my partner continued with retail. So we were happy once again, but Amazon thought, Amazon had other ideas. So they sent out an email to all the people who had bought hoverboards from us in the last 3 to 4 months, telling them to make sure that their hoverboard is compliant. They send them a few links to how to check for compliance. And that's when, and it gets worse because media actually manipulated their news, and it was changing. So the message from Amazon was, make sure your hoverboard is compliant. Next morning, the news in the media was, Amazon urges hoverboard buyers to dispose of must-have Christmas present. So we started getting all these emails from people saying, oh, I've already disposed of my hoverboard, I want a full refund. And of course, they were being brutally honest, right? So this was a complete nightmare. We had, so I was in the US at this time attending a conference, and I was just sitting in my hotel room answering all these emails. We didn't really have a choice. So some of these customers, we were able to convince that our product was compliant, and the message from Amazon is not to dispose them off, but to make sure they have a compliant product. We send them the certificates. We send them everything we could. And then for the most aggressive customers, we just had to refund them. So imagine having to refund £375 to a very large proportion of your customers and not having the product back. So when I told you earlier that that was our lowest point, I actually lied to you. This was the lowest point. At this point, we thought this was officially our worst nightmare come true. But we kind of got through it. We were happy once again. We were selling via our website, and we thought that was it. But then Amazon had different ideas. They thought, just in case people missed out the first email, they'll send out a second one. So they did that 6 weeks later, and then we had a second wave of returns. Once again, people, this lasted for about 2 weeks. We had to do a few more refunds. It affected our feedback score as well. But at this point, I actually thought Amazon personally didn't like me. But we kind of survived, and sales were still good. So at this point, I personally decided to focus only on exports, whereas my client, he just continued doing retail and decided to invest even more in the brand. Because despite all these external factors, despite the whole world being against us, customers were buying the product. So that's when the turnaround started. By this time, all the small players who wanted to get into this product got washed out of the market. There were just 3 big players in the market now. A majority of the 120 plus factories that came up had shut down, so there were about 20 plus factories. We were quite lucky, our factory being one of the bigger ones survived. So at this point, our client decided that he would go really big with brand building, and he invested a lot of money in building their brand. Sales was still good, he was doing well. We became hyperactive with the quality control side of things. So we went inside the factory. This is probably the most involved project we have had as a sourcing and QC company. We pretty much took over the production line. We helped factory with setting up the production line, minimizing errors. Every single component in the product was sourced by us, from the PCB to the motors, and the factory was supposed to buy from our nominated suppliers only. And things were starting to look good. And then in April 2016, this year, by that time our client was doing 1 40-feet container a month. By October 2016, it was about 3 containers a month, which is about $600,000 in purchase value and about $1.7, $1.8 million in sales. So this ended up being one of the best products that we have ever done. Our return rate when we first started out with this product was about 12%. It came down to 1.5%. Which is a pretty decent return rate for a product like this in China, because especially with a product like this, there's a lot of user-induced damage as well. The factory decided, so UL, which is a quality standards organization based in the US, came up with special standards for hoverboards. And to get a UL certification, the cost was $60,000 US. We were able to convince the factory to invest in that, which took our product to a whole new level, because UL had really strict requirements for a product like this. Our client is now the biggest seller in the UK for hoverboards. They're actually in talks with Amazon to become a supplier to them under the Vendor Central program. In fact, it was 2 days ago that all the documentation was approved. So if they do get back onto Amazon, they would be the first seller to do that, and they'll probably enjoy a monopoly for a while. So it all ended up well after all the losses. And that's pretty much it. There are a few lessons that we learned from this, and hopefully you can take away from this presentation as well. The first thing is you should never expect the factories to quote for a compliant product when you first reach out to them. The reason I say this is because most factories know that most clients sourcing online are not comparing like for like. So if they quote you for a compliant product upfront, they will price themselves out. So they never do that. The only time they'll quote you for a fully compliant product is when you've been through that back and forth process, exchanging emails, telling them what your certification requirements are, what your product quality standards are. So unless you're a big box retailer, don't expect to be quoted for a compliant product upfront. And saying that you need a product that is CE compliant would only get you a CE sticker on the product. So don't expect factories to understand certifications. So we see a lot of posts online with people saying, oh, factories are using fake certificates in China, they Photoshop them. What we have learned from our experience is most of the factories don't even know that they're using fake certifications, because they don't actually know enough about certifications to know what's fake and what's real. There are a lot of certificates. So when these factories, I'm talking about the small and medium-sized factories, which the majority of the Amazon sellers work with. There are really good factories in China, and some of these medium-sized factories are pretty good as well. But our assumptions should always be based on the fact that we expect the worst case scenario. So a lot of these factories, when they need certifications, they would go out to these certification agents. And a lot of these agents would either get certificates from Chinese labs, which are recognized in China but not recognized in the West, or they would just Photoshop them, which is easier and cheaper. Get product liability insurance. This is once again very important. With a product like that, we were really lucky that no one ever got hurt, the product was safe, but this could happen with anyone. You know, if someone gets hurt, something happens, you really need product. In fact, I believe this is a requirement on Amazon US now, or probably on all Amazon marketplaces. You need to have product liability insurance. It's not something that's enforced strictly yet, but it's something that does give you a lot of protection. Have your compliance paperwork ready before you need it. So when, you know, a compliance authority like FDA or trading standards, when they request you for certifications, if you wait for it, firstly, you end up paying a lot of the storage costs, but secondly, it also makes them wonder if your certificates are genuine or not. So you're probably, you know, more likely to go through scrutiny if you take time in sending these documents in. So it's very important that you have your paperwork ready when you first start importing your product. And last but not the least, don't give up on a product too early. So this is another issue we find with some importers, probably one about 20 cases we get. Factory makes the product, it's not perfect the first time around, the client thinks the factory is unprofessional, and they just dump them. What we have found is when you're paying 1/5 to 1/10 of the cost that you would pay in a developed country, you need to be prepared for a bit of a grind with factories. You know, you need to handhold them and work with them to get the product perfected. So with a new product, with a new factory, I find it takes about, you can get from 0 to 90, 95% on the first order, but to get from 95 to 100%, it takes a couple of orders. Factories need to customize their system and processes to, you know, meet your needs. So it's very important you kind of, you know, once you have spent the time on the due diligence in a factory, you genuinely feel a supplier is good, you should give them a chance to, you know, offer you a perfect product. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
A few questions?
Where do you get product liability insurance? I think if you sell in USA, then you have to get insurance in US. Is that right?
Right, yeah. So you would get it in the country where you're importing your product.
Okay, so with a company in Hong Kong, you can't get insurance in the US, is my understanding.
I'm not too sure about that, but I do believe that having a US company helps.
Questions?
I just want to add a point about that. You know, with product liability insurance, it also depends on the risk with the product. So for this product, the product liability insurance, I think it costs us about £20,000 annually now. But because we're doing a large volume, but it's considered a highly risky product. But for some of the more stable products, it might be a lot cheaper than that.
Sorry, I don't know who asked that question, but I just had a comment about the liability insurance. We manufacture in China, and we ship to the US, and the marine cargo insurance will cover you, even though you're not a US company. It will cover product landed in the US.
Yeah, from my understanding, it does not cover you if the product is intentionally destroyed by someone. So if trading standards or say, FDA decided to destroy your product, do you feel it still covers you? Question back to you.
Well, I don't know the specifics about that, but I wanted to just, in case she was just generally asking if, even though you're not a U.S. corporation, whether or not you can get liability insurance.
Oh, right. Oh, you're
Yes,
talking about the
you
liability
can.
insurance. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the freight insurance thing.
Hey, just a survey. Liability insurance is an interesting question. It's an area that I'm looking for a speaker on. Raise your hand, because we've got a lot of sellers here. Who actually has product liability insurance? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you guys are all doing PL sales. All right, very good. So if you have product liability insurance questions, you can ask some of the folks whose hands you saw. Any other questions for Ash?
Give me the mic.
Could you LLC each product just in case one product goes like completely south, similar to like the hoverboards? Then you can belly flop that company without affecting the rest. Are you allowed to do that?
So you mean you have different companies importing the same product under different names?
Yeah, so each product, it's kind of like if you're in real estate, each house you own is its own LLC, so just in case someone falls through the roof or whatever, that house can only go down by itself. It can't bring everyone with them.
You're all throwing a lot of legal questions at me. I'm not sure, to be honest. I would be the wrong person to, I don't want to give you the wrong advice on that.
But registering that with Amazon is like next to impossible. You'd have to register different brands and different logins and everything because Amazon doesn't allow you to have more than one company registered in the back end.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So you've been talking about a complicated electrical product. For non-electrical products, does all your same advice still apply, or is it a bit easier for a non-electrical product?
It is a lot easier to get insurance, but the same advice still
So not
applies.
for insurance, but for everything you've been talking about, getting all the compliance and stuff. Is it still? Do we still need to be? Are you still suggesting we should spend a bit more time and money on the compliance, even for non-electrical products as
No,
well?
absolutely. I think it depends on the complexity of the product. So the more moving parts, the more components your product has, the more sophisticated your compliance plan would be. But the main thing is with any product, you have to do a risk assessment of what can go wrong with this product. What are the risks to the user of the product? With some products, that would be a lot lower that risk, whereas with other products like this, that's a lot higher. So depending on your risk assessment, you come up with a compliance plan.
And how difficult is it to, if you have a product that you've been selling for a while, how difficult is it then to go back and think, okay, what does this actually need to be
Actually,
compliant?
I believe it's a lot easier in that case because you have a lot of feedback by that time. You have reviews, you have users that you can actually reach out to for feedback. And then based on that, you probably have an established relationship with the factory as well. So a factory that you've worked with for a while is more likely to go out of their way to make changes on a product than a factory that you're working with for the first time.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, that's all the time we have for Q&A.
Great, thank you very much.
Hey, Ash, thank you very much. Big round of applause for Ash.